Good morning, Detachment 630. Good morning, Major Patrick. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well.
Good, good. So, just a little background with Major Patrick and I. Both him and I are both in a philosophy class, and we got to talking, got to know his background a little bit, and thought it'd be a great idea to have him on the podcast. So, hope you're excited to be here with us.
I am. It's fun to share a class with you too, because you're always in on it. Now, before we begin, so anything I say today, all the ideas I express, they don't necessarily reflect the opinions of the DoD, the Marine Corps, Kent State, or any place I work. Just to throw that out there.
Yes,
They're
sir.
my opinions.
Yes, sir. There we
Okay.
go. Good, good to
So
put that out there.
yeah. So you were asking. Now, that's a loaded question. A little bit of background. You know, I'll keep it to just a few snippets, and if you need more,
Mhm.
just let me know.
Sounds
But
good.
so I actually enlisted in the Marine Corps back in the early '90s. I was an infantryman for about 9 years, and then the Marine Corps has a enlisted to commissioning program similar like in the Air Force. And if you get selected for that,
Mm-hmm.
then you go, you either finish school or you start school and finish school. You get your degree, and at the completion of your degree, then you're commissioned a second lieutenant.
Okay, awesome. So it's kind of the same program we do. You had to do ROTC and
It's similar. It's
okay,
similar. Things are a little bit different if you were prior enlisted, but it's almost the same.
okay.
Yeah.
And you were telling me a little bit earlier too. So you had a family, and then you ended up going enlisted, and then you went back to college. How was it having a family and going back to college and doing the ROTC thing all kind of at the same time?
Well, the military's for decades has been really good about balancing family life and your professional development. Um, Specifically, that really started in the late 80s. And
Mm,
so I was right in the middle of it. So the Marine Corps really took care of me. It sent me to Ohio State to finish up there. And you're right, actually, I had a family when I came into the Marine Corps. I was already a little bit older. I was 23. I had a little girl. I had a wife. I enlisted. Then the Marine Corps sent me to school, involved in the ROTC, the Navy ROTC.
okay.
Um, got my commission, and then, I did whatever the Corps wanted me to as an officer after that. But as far as, balancing family and school and all the requirements for that, it was a real good balance, and it keeps you busy.
Oh, I could imagine. I'm sure you were super busy then. So what motivated you to pursue the commissioning while you're enlisted, and then what was the one thing that made you, hey, I want to be commissioned?
Well, I think for a lot of younger guys when they're going in the military, you're dealing with alpha males,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, that's just the nature of what we do. And as part of that, you're always looking for the next challenge, the next opportunity. But the thing is, in the Marine Corps, if you're in the infantry, you get to a certain point that if you're enlisted and you're in the infantry, after a while, you won't be a trigger puller anymore. You won't be tactical.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are in the infantry and you're in the Marine Corps, when you're a staff sergeant or a gunnery sergeant, most of the time you'll be in the company office, right? And you'll be doing really important things, making sure the fight
100%.
happens, but you won't be pulling a trigger. And if you still want to remain tactical and you want to make a difference, then if you have an opportunity for a commissioning program, then you take it.
That makes sense. So you're still able to make a giant impact, and then you're still able to stay tactical too, because
Right. I wasn't,
company grade
yeah, I
officer.
wasn't quite ready to give that up.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Sounds like a pretty awesome career so far. Um, I think we talked about this a little bit, but looking back on your early days in training and education, what were some of the most challenging and rewarding aspects of your development as an officer?
Well, I'll tell you too, because there's an important lesson from when I became an enlisted Marine too. And the first was, although it's cliche, it was the transformation in recruit training, the transformation in boot camp.
Okay.
So as a young guy, for whatever reason, I had this, psychological defect. I don't know, but I always hated um, when people would tell me what to do, even if I knew it had to
Yeah.
be done. I always hated it. There's something weird about me. I couldn't stand when people would tell me to do something. But the good thing is that lasted for about 5 seconds in recruit training, as you can imagine,
Oh, I'm sure. I'm
right?
sure they broke you down, built you
Yeah,
back up.
yeah, exactly. So that
Hmm.
really, that was great because that, got that chip off my shoulder.
Hmm.
But also, it was probably the first time in my life in recruit training and early times in the Marine Corps where um, I was really good at something I was supposed to be doing, you know? And all I had to do was run, shout, yell, fight a little bit, and shoot. And it's like, I happened to be good at that stuff, and it was a really good feeling. So that was a pivotal point as a young Marine. Now, I'd say as an officer, um, one of the things you learn fairly early is that, and you got to hear me out on this one. You learn really early that you don't matter. You do not
Hmm.
count. And what I mean by that is the second that you decide to accept that commission from Congress that appoints you as a second lieutenant, the second that happens, it's not about you anymore. It's never, ever going to be about you, your wishes, your desires. It's all about you leading your platoon or your flight,
Yeah, we
right?
call them
Yeah.
flights, platoons,
It,
squadron. A little different there.
yeah. So the second that you accept a commission, it's all about them. It will never be about you ever again. All your personal wishes and desires, they're important and they're good to have, but they will always come second to you taking care of your flight,
That makes
taking care of the
sense.
platoon.
That makes.
And that's a lesson I think that all junior officers learn the first few minutes after they accept the commission.
Have you seen what happens to officers if they care more about themselves than they care about the people that they lead? They wash out pretty quick, or what ends up happening
Well,
to these
it
guys?
depends what time area you're talking about. In Vietnam, they get fragged.
Mm.
You know what I'm talking about?
No, what is frag?
Frag, they
Yeah,
get
with the
killed.
grenade.
Yeah.
So they wouldn't be able
So
to lead their men correctly
they'd be dead.
then. Yeah.
So, um, yeah, the consequences are rightly severe right away if it's obvious that you aren't putting your men first.
Hmm.
And it'll be obvious to them first of all, and then it'll be obvious to the chain of command, and you'll see it right away. And if the military doesn't get rid of you, you'll be in a job that nobody wants,
Exactly.
which is a good place for somebody who doesn't have their priorities straight.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting. I was reading a Hackworth book at one point. You ever had
Oh
read
yeah.
that book about Face?
Mm.
That part where that one guy he wasn't authorized to go lead a platoon of soldiers, and he ended up it turned into a catastrophe, right? I think he was a support guy, and
Hmm.
then there's no way we're gonna have you lead guys into battle. So lessons learned on that one for sure. So
Well,
it's interesting to
sometimes
hear you
that
say that.
story, yeah, story is more about ego than it
Hmm.
is about capability. You
Exactly, it's
gotta
ego. Yep.
balance them. Sure.
Yep. So that makes sense. So I think we went over background pretty good. I want to kind of get into joint operations since we have Marines here, Air Force here. So first question we have on that is the military is increasingly focused on joint operations across different branches. How have you seen the role of joint operations evolve through your career?
Well, I mean that's a big question for just a little bit of time, especially because from a Marine concept, you know, like below the the regimental level, joint operations means something different to Marines than it would to all the other services. And here's the
Hmm.
reason why. Just for
Okay.
at a certain level. Um, Marines operate by a concept which we call MAGTF. It's a Marine Air Ground Task Force. Marines are built to have air assets, waterborne assets, land
Hmm.
assets, all that stuff organic. Okay, so we own all that stuff. So at a certain level, if you just want like a middleweight fight,
Hmm.
the Marine doesn't need joint operations. Okay, because they
That
have
makes
like
sense.
a single battle concept, single commander concept.
Yeah, they
So
have the boats, the plane, everything you need
right,
to get you from point A to point B.
right. But so that's only at a certain level. So the Marine Corps is really good at a middleweight fight, going in you want to bloody somebody's nose, right, and then get out. That's where your Marine Corps
Mhm.
will thrive. So when you talk about joint operations to Marines that have just been at battalion level or below, they'll be like, we don't need them.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
are joint
exactly.
operations. We have our own planes, we have our own boats, all this other stuff. However, in the real picture, the real world picture, especially after 9/11, um, militaries all across the world, not just in our country, but also coalition militaries, they have needed to rely more and more on these joint operations. So even for the Marine Corps, who prides itself on being able to work air, land, and sea, at a
Mhm.
certain point, we definitely have got to work joint operations. And you see that historically in Iraq and Afghanistan. Anytime you need to, sustain operations for more than a month, at least on the Marine side, you're going to use joint operations. So when you get out there, don't don't let a captain or something tell you we don't need it because
Because you will need it at some point then, because it
eventually.
seems like from my perspective, the like you said, the Marines do have that limited capability. You had the capability, but it's just, I think it's a numbers thing, isn't it? You guys
It's
have the
numbers and
smallest
scale.
budget,
It's
numbers and scale,
numbers and
but
scale. So a lot of it depends on how you most always it's dependent on how well you can sustain yourself. So a
mhm,
MEU is the smallest MAGTF we offer. It's a Marine Expeditionary Unit. Okay, so that's the smallest Marine Air Ground task force.
okay.
It can sustain itself for 2 weeks. Now that's enough time to get in, conduct an awesome raid, kill the bad guys, and then get out. Um, but if you're looking for more than 2 weeks, then you need to be replenished. And you're gonna have to be replenished most likely by the Navy, or if you're really in theater, then the Air Force.
Yes,
Or
sir.
you might be able to beg, borrow, and steal off the Army if they're. But even when you're borrowing and begging, that's a
Mhm,
form of joint operations.
exactly.
So your question was, how has it changed? Well, um, it's like a cycle, right? So
Mhm,
in Korea, the Army and the Air Force, and to some extent the Marines were awesome at joint operations. Okay, then it fell out, and
mhm.
then as we started to roll up into Vietnam, it was okay. But about a fourth or fifth year into Vietnam, especially the Army and the Navy were really, or as you were, the Army and the Air Force were really good at joint operations.
Yeah.
You share a lot of the same comm systems. You share a similar chain of command. It's integrated. But then again, that fell through, or not fell through, but it started to weaken. Um, it didn't really pick up in earnest until after 9/11, and then after
Yeah.
that, it's big time. All right. So since 9/11, we've developed all kinds of computer systems, like integrated management systems. I don't know if they teach that here yet, but
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. They kind of teach it as we go along, but a lot of it seems to be a technology game now to see how we can connect all the branches together.
exactly, exactly. So that's changed a lot. But the thing about joint operations, and I may be bleeding into the next question, so
Hmm.
but the thing about joint operations is there's different levels in your warfighting capabilities where it's going to matter. So, for example, um, all your pilots, whether they're Army, Navy, Air Force, whatever, they all work very similar to each other.
Yeah.
The way they're trained is very similar. The way they cogitate, the way they take information, process it, the way they, drop bombs, um, the way they report. When you call for fire or I call for indirect fire, I can talk to a Marine pilot and a Air Force and Navy pilot will totally understand everything I'm saying. So on the aviation side, you do joint operations, it's very slick,
Yeah.
very
So when
smooth.
you're calling in close air support, you're pretty much going to say the same thing across the board then.
Right. There's
So,
not too much to hassle there. On the opposite side of the spectrum, where you meet the most friction is your logistics, which
okay.
arguably is the most important.
I'm sure.
Without beans, bullets, and band-aids,
Get
you're
very
not gonna,
far now.
yeah, you're not gonna get anything done. So joint operations, the biggest friction point is your logistics. So where joint operations works is in the planning phase.
Okay.
So good joint operations is 95% planning. If that 95% effort doesn't go in ahead of time, it's going to be a goat rope, when you actually try to execute operations.
Interesting. That actually makes a lot of sense. So,
It's huge. It's
hmm
huge. Yeah.
all right. Let me see. Um, key challenges and benefits of working on the branches. I think we already kind of went over that one.
Well, read that to me.
I'll go over it. So, what are the key challenges and benefits of working with other branches in joint missions, and how do you foster effective teamwork in these diverse environments?
Oh, you're right. We did go over
We did go over that pretty good.
that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I guess the teamwork, like you said, a lot of planning, and I think that even like kind of touches into because you're a JROTC instructor, we're ROTC. A lot of what we do is planning day to day. Like for us as POC, we're doing POC lead lab. We're creating op boards. We're getting
Oh yeah,
approvals.
huge.
We're just, I mean, I mean, the entire week it takes 4 days to plan one day.
Yeah.
So and I couldn't imagine doing that with different branches, with different formats and ways to go about things. And like we've talked about before, different mindsets, right? Every
Right.
branch kind of has a different mindset. Like the culture here at the Air Force is a lot different than maybe the Marines, I'm sure.
Sure. But with that integrated management system I had mentioned earlier, it's funny you should bring that up because you guys have an instruction and we have one. Ours is called the Marine Corps planning process. The Army has one, Makua. You guys have one called the Air Force. I think it's just Air Force planning process.
Hmm.
And it's, how you plan out your operations. And if you put them side by side, they're also very similar. And I think that was done on purpose back in the late 80s, early 90s. And what I think it does when we're younger, like maybe
Hmm.
your age, is it shapes the way you think. It shapes the way you take in information, process it, and puke it back out. And we all go through that process in some form or fashion. So when we end up having to work together, sure, we may be from different places, in our careers or whatever, different ways, but when it nuts to bolts, it comes right down to it. We're doing a lot of the same stuff.
Exactly. Same name or same process, different name essentially. And the way we think, I'm sure we're all
Yeah,
kind of raised up kind of in the same way. The like you said, like
I
they
think
do
so.
instill a way of leadership and processing. Like we've had leadership talks, and it just seems like a lot of the same disciplines are instilled in us, right? So
Right, right.
it's awesome to see. So can you share a particular experience where joint operations have significantly impacted the success of a mission or objective? And then how'd you collaborate between branches to play a role?
Hmm. Okay, this is a great example because it makes Marine Corps look really good. Maybe if I give you a poor example, it'd be better. But I was always real excited about this. 2001 and into 2002, the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit conducted the longest raid in history. We came up through the bottom in Afghanistan and we attacked 450 miles up into Taliban territory to take over the airport at Kandahar, I think.
Oh wow.
The reason that's a joint environment, like I remember how I was saying 95% of it is planning.
Yeah.
None of that would have worked. As awesome as the Marines were, on those few weeks, none of it would have worked if there wasn't a good embarkation and de-embarkation plan with the Navy. Okay.
Okay.
There's no way any of that could have even happened as well as it did if you didn't have real good joint operation capability with the Navy. Because they've got to get all the stuff in the right locations, plus their presence. Um, it wasn't just amphibs. You had other parts of the Big Blue Navy too to act as a deterrence. So they're acting as a deterrence, for outside forces, so that the amphibs can get in and drop off the Marines in a fashion that made it possible for them to do that awesome raid.
That makes sense. So they were kind of the backdrop. I mean, all the Marines got all the glory, but
Well,
without the without the Navy, it wouldn't have been possible at all.
yeah, the Navy got their share too.
Then.
They got
Oh,
their
did
share
they?
too. Oh yeah, they got their share. But I'm, but the thing is that that's a great example of joint
Hmm.
operations because neither the Navy nor the Marine Corps would have been able to conduct that raid, without each other.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty awesome to see and everything. And um, even in news today, it's kind of cool to see all these branches working together right now with the hurricane relief efforts and everything too.
Oh,
So,
absolutely. I mean, a lot of people don't think about your humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. That
hmm.
is a real capability that you have in the military. You want to use it sparingly because you're not a charity force.
Exactly.
but you do want to use it, when you can.
Especially for moments like that. So, um, that's awesome. Awesome to hear. Good stuff there. But we want to move into military ethics. I know you and I are both. You got your masters. You're going for your masters in philosophy. You have your undergrad in philosophy, and then you have a master's in history, right?
I do.
So, um, I think it's been helpful for me, especially being a philosophy major and getting into leadership and seeing how that could impact the way I lead and the decisions I make, and then the ethics behind all of that. Because I
Oh
think we have
yeah.
an understanding of ethics that maybe a lot of people don't have. I'm sure you could get a little bit of ethics here and there as you're learning to lead, but in philosophy, I think it's an environment that really kind of
I
gives
agree
you
with you.
a
Yeah.
big nozzle of information on that.
Well, see that's a good point because a good educational philosophy will give you the perspective that people don't often think about. When people go through their daily lives, walking to work or school, dealing with people, they consider themselves typically ethical people,
Hmm.
but you're not really forced to think about it until you start taking these classes, and then you're like, whoa, okay, now what did I base that decision on? Yeah,
Exactly.
which is really important because when do you graduate? You'll
2026.
So
So I got a year to do.
2026, just a few years after that, you will, be a flight commander. Did I use the right
Yep, flight
nomenclature?
commander.
And so you'll be a flight commander, and like I said, everything that happens or doesn't happen in that flight is on your shoulders, and you'll have a certain amount of NJP authority. So non-judicial punishment means that you are the judge, the jury, and the executioner. There's no due process, none of the other stuff you see in the civilian world. If you've got a young airman and you have probable cause to think that he did something wrong that he's not supposed to be doing,
Mm,
okay, you have someone conduct an investigation. You get the results of that investigation. And now you have to make some really ethical decisions because his whole future depends, on how you interpret that. Because you have to balance the crap that he did against the
mhm,
health of the unit, and there's no jury, to decide for you. You know, you're going to be the executioner of whatever decision you come up with, whether you take rank or pay or something like that. And that's some ethical considerations that nobody else in the world really has to do.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. I've never really heard that perspective on it on such a personal level too.
Yeah.
And we call I know when I went to field training, we have a military competency they look for. It's called moral courage. And a lot of what we do is, hey, you got to make a moral decision, whether it be right or wrong. It's a hard decision to make, right? Like, you take rank or pay that affects that guy's life personally, right? But you
Right.
also there's also something too with that is if you're not doing that, making those decisions, then the entire unit might say, hey, like we have a weak commander that isn't willing to make the hard choices.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly.
it's interesting to see that. I've noticed that with leadership, it's just the fine tuning there is with it. It's not like you can't just go one way or the other. You got to kind of narrow it in and narrow it in and kind of be a little bit more surgical about things and
I like that.
decisions.
Surgical. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
a good way of putting it.
yeah, because a lot of decisions, like you gotta look for understanding and understand that, and then if you don't look for understanding first, it could really go downhill. So, but you have a lot more experience than me, and you've probably seen it all. So, I want to get into the first question here. So, military ethics can be complex, especially in a modern battlefield. How do you balance maintaining ethical standards with the pressure of accomplishing mission objectives? So that really segues in what we're talking about.
Yeah, I would say there's two ways to look at your ethics, just for the purposes of this conversation. Not that they're any different, but you're going to face different situations. You're going to have ethical considerations uh, in theater and operations of the battlefield that are going to be a little bit different than the ethical considerations you have back in garrison, or
Hmm.
in the barracks, or back at the unit. They're both important, but you're going to have to consider both. Now, in theater, um, the good thing is you've got your ROEs, you've got your rules of
Hmm.
engagement, and oftentimes your rules of engagement will coincide with mission accomplishment. Rarely do your rules of engagement actually work against your mission.
Hmm.
Hardly ever. And you've got tons of smart people putting in like just years of thought. I mean, some people will not agree with me, but you've got really good people, smart, intelligent, practical people putting in tons of thought on how these rules of engagement can link up with your mission accomplishment.
Mm.
So, as a young officer or just, anybody in the fight, your responsibility is to really understand those rules of engagement and, follow them. Almost always, they'll keep you out of legal trouble and they'll also keep you out of your own ethical trouble. There's not usually a lot of friction between your rules of engagement and your mission accomplishment. It'll be difficult times,
I'm sure.
but they usually don't go head to head. So that's a good thing. Trust your rules of engagement, and that will help you with your ethical
Yeah,
considerations.
and you see it from different perspectives too. Like something that might make sense with the from a higher aspect, right? This might be from a diplomatic aspect, might not
Hmm.
make as much sense on the ground. And some people, just the stories I've heard don't have that perspective. So it's like you said, it's a struggle. But um, in some of these classes, we talk about strategy and how if you're making the wrong rules of engagement on the battlefield or you're breaking those rules of engagement that could have serious impacts diplomatically.
It's a tactical mistake that can have strategic consequences.
Exactly,
Yeah.
that's a great way to put it. That's a great way to put it. So what are ethical dilemmas have you encountered in your career, and how do you approach resolving them while upholding your professional and personal values?
Well, now this is where I segue into the decisions back in garrison.
Mm.
So, what do you guys call like when you're not in the field, not on? Yeah, you just call that.
Non-deployed, I guess.
Okay,
Maybe
yeah.
maybe I
Let's say you're back at the fort, right?
yeah back
And
oh
and you're not deployed.
Mhm.
You're just training your airmen, right?
Exactly.
So this would relate more to that. Unfortunately, when I was commissioned, um, I had a staff sergeant who worked for me, and as a staff NCO, he's supposed to be your link between the young Marines, and your leadership. And he's
Hmm.
supposed to be a great example for them to follow, and also kind of a mentor to young officers. Yeah. And this guy was a turd, okay, in so many levels.
Hmm.
And I tried to work with him, because I had already been an enlisted Marine for 9 years, and so it wasn't like I was brand new, so I wanted to work. He was out of weight. He looked like a soup sandwich in his uniform. He was just a mess. Whenever we would do some like real training in the woods, he would complain. I mean, he's a staff NCO, and he would complain about the weight of the packs, how fast we're moving. Every bad leadership quality you can think of, he seemed to embody that.
Yeah.
You know. So after a year of not being able to really make any impact with him, and it was time to write his fitness report. I knew that writing this fitness report was going to be adverse. And in the Marine Corps, if you get an adverse fitness report, you won't be able to reenlist. You'll
Yeah.
be done. Now, he was a staff sergeant almost at 20 years, so he's near his retirement. But that tells you something. If you're a staff sergeant and you're 20 years, it's known
Yeah.
that you're a
You're
turd. Okay,
tracking pretty slow.
yeah, that's an E6. That'd be a technical sergeant for you
Yeah.
guys, right? Yeah. But um, of course, I went to my chain of command to let them know, what was going to happen because I didn't want anybody to be surprised. Because honestly, that's a ethical consideration. He had a family,
Mm.
and I was getting ready to just end this guy's career. So I needed to weigh on one hand, okay, a family man, right? And he's got kids to take care of. He's got a wife to take care of. She was Marine too, but he's got people to take care of, right? And on the other hand, we've got a unit more important to take care of, right? They need good examples. You can't have a cancer in your unit. So weighing the two, it was more important for me to look at the health of the unit. So I researched ways to just get him out of the unit and go work somewhere else, um, so that he could go be a cancer somewhere else, wait out his 20 years, and then leech off the government with a retirement pension.
Mm.
That didn't work, so we ended up just getting rid of him. Okay, we got rid of them, and that was an ethical consideration where you had to weigh one or the other. But I think it was pretty clear that um, the Marine Corps or the military in general is not a charity. If you're
Exactly.
here, you're expected to fight and do your part. And if you're out of body standards, if you're weak, if you're not keeping up your mind, right, or if you're doing stuff you're not supposed to be doing, then you need to go
Exactly.
because everything we do is based on our reputation. And if you got one turd out there that's ruining your reputation, it makes everybody look bad.
Yeah. I always like the book. I think it's Energy Bus. You ever read Energy Bus? It's a really
No.
simple book, but it has a lot of good stuff to say. Like you meet those, you have those people that are called energy vampires.
Oh,
You know
okay.
what I'm
I've
talking
heard of
about?
that.
Energy vampires. So you have a group of people, and it could only take one person, like you said, that one person that could ruin the attitude of the entire group or the momentum of everything, right? And like you said, it's hard to get rid of those people sometimes.
Yeah.
But
You call
you,
that energy bus?
the book is Energy Bus. I can't remember who wrote
That's
it,
cool. I'll look it up.
but Energy Vampires is the term I would coin for it. I'm sure we've all known those people. It's like,
Oh, for sure.
just show up, have a good attitude, right? I think that's I've heard that a few times. Like, just have a good attitude in your unit.
Yeah, that's
That
huge.
goes a long ways,
It
right?
does.
Even on a bad day, if you're the guy with the good attitude, it shows,
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
So, and
100%.
that's a controllable, right? I like the word controllables. And so if you control your attitude, that'll boost you up to the right thing, and then show up, want to improve the people around you. I think those are some big things of just how to be
Yeah,
not just successful in the military but life as
I
well.
like
So
that. Controllables. That's neat.
control the controllables. That's what I try and do. Like you said, like get your body standards, control that as much as you can. Control the academics where you can.
Mhm.
And these are all things that do help you, especially in our from our perspective in the Air Force ROTC. All this stuff is a competitive
Yeah.
portion for going up to boards for officer boards, so EAs, enrollment allocations we call them. So just look at those and look at those standards, and not just I've also heard this too in some of these podcasts. Not just look at the standard, like the minimum, right? People use the word, oh, it just takes this much to get there.
Yeah.
The minimums are, you shouldn't even be looking at those. Maybe the averages, maybe look at the averages if you can find the averages of people that get there, but you want to look at the averages and say, I want to be better than average with everything you do. So
Right.
I'm
That's a
sure even
good.
with the Marines, I'm sure you guys have an average. We call it PFA, fitness score, whatever. And
Sure.
a lot of people, you have the guy that's like, well, I'm just gonna crush that anyways. So
Absolutely.
um, or try and outdo yourself from last time, right? So it's always that constant improvement. So,
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
so what ethical dilemmas? Okay, so in your view, what role do ethical considerations play in leadership, both in Marine Corps and joint operations with other branches?
Well, yeah, I'll divide that in two since it's basically two questions. And really, I'm just
Hmm.
going to focus on the leadership question because that'll carry over into
Yep.
operations. But think about think about it like this. Somebody's do it this way. Have you guys talked about the difference between management and leadership?
I'm actually taking a class right now,
Oh,
management class. I
oh,
don't know if you've
nice,
taken that, but we're talking about the difference between management and leadership. To
nice.
yeah, a little bit with that
Well,
paper.
the way I talk to the young ones about it is management is, hey, you're in charge and you tell people what to do.
Hmm.
Okay. Leadership is the art of influencing people so they want to do what needs to be done. They
Exactly.
want to follow you. You know, they want to run to the sound of the guns. How amazing is that?
Exactly.
Good leadership makes people do crazy stuff, right? So, would you want to follow someone who demonstrates, you know, good ethical foundations? Or would you want to follow someone who you know, could sell his grandmother for, of the real, you know what I mean? So when the people you lead see that you have a moral compass, right, and they see that your decisions are guided by ethical considerations, they will want to emulate you. Most of them, unless they're like devil
Mhm.
worshippers or something, they will want to follow you. So that's one of the cornerstones of good leadership.
Yeah, setting a great example. I think. I
Yeah.
mean, everybody always has somebody. Some of my best leaders are people that I've looked up to, and
Right.
uh, and that isn't just in the professional realm. It's also, hey, what does this guy's personal life look like, right?
It does. Yeah, you're
And
right.
what does he do in his free time, and what does he do when he's working that really sets him apart from somebody else and makes him a great person. So,
You're right.
um,
If you
yeah.
got a guy who's he's awesome at work or something. Then he goes home and he's like a deadbeat dad, right?
Yeah,
Or he doesn't spend any time with his kids or something, or he doesn't treat his lady right. Then you can't be half a leader.
exactly.
You gotta do both all the time.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. So, we're getting into some closing remarks here. So, as somebody with extensive experience, what advice would you give to cadets and young officers on navigating the complexities of the joint operations, like we talked about, maintaining strong ethical compass throughout their careers? So,
We're getting two questions, so I'll just lean on one and I'll answer for both.
mm,
Um, in the Marine Corps, we have a motto that says every Marine is a rifleman.
yeah,
Rifleman first. And I would extend that to all the services. So before you do anything else, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Command, Coast Guard,
yep,
Space Force, Coast Guard, you're a warrior first. Okay.
yep,
So before your airmen go out there and they're turning wrenches on the planes and stuff, right? Before they go out there and they make sure the tarmac is clear, before they do any of their duties, they need to be reminded every day that that's their secondary job. Their first job is that they are warriors and they need a warrior ethos. They need a
hmm,
warrior mentality. Now, not every one of your guys are going to be able to, wash his hands in the blood of his enemies, but
yeah,
what they do is very important and they need to know that what they do has kinetic results down the line. So the maintainers on the planes, right? They've got to know they have a warrior ethos. To generate that ethos as young officers, you need to get them out there and you need to, generate this ethos in them, get them involved in combatives, get them involved in some combat sports. Do your martial arts. I think every unit has a sort of a
hmm,
form of martial arts. Get them out there, teach them boxing, right? You got to be physical with these guys and young ladies too, because that's one of the surefire ways to develop a combat mindset. And they may be working a desk doing admin or something, their entire career, but they still need to know that they have that warrior ethos. And that having that ethos will determine exactly how hard and how well they work throughout their entire career.
hmm.
That's the advice
Yeah,
I
I
give.
actually really like that answer. And that kind of brings me back to the story. So I did my officer development training in Nellis Air Force Base, like I mentioned a couple times. But
Hmm.
we had this lieutenant colonel. We had some F-35 staged over here. We had the maintainers there,
Yeah.
and he came in and he just impromptu started talking to us and just said, "Hey, that's one of the hardest things to do while we're in Las Vegas is keep our guys in the fight, right? Like keep us
Mm.
mentally in the fight because we got Las Vegas down the road, right? Like." It doesn't seem like you're just turning a wrench every day, but at the same time, like there's always an adversary out there, and
Absolutely right.
making sure that hey, like be ready to go whenever you're ready, whenever you're called. So um, and that's the job as like you said, junior officer. So
Yeah.
I think that's one great way to end it. So
Go,
all
good.
right, anything else? Any other final closing remarks?
Yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
It's
this is
awesome.
neat.
Thanks for coming on by. This
Sure.
has been great. All right, Major Patrick. Thank you, sir.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Det 630.